We are just 38 days away from Election Day in the United States. Today, Barack Obama and Mitt Romney are in the northeastern states. I'm Daniel Proussalidis with Washington Bureau Chief Bryn Weese live from the U.S. Capitol. With only 38 days to go, Sun News will take you to the finish line with live special coverage every night until November 6th, with Bryn and me at the helm. We'll bring you the strategy, the polls, and the attack ads you won't see anywhere else. We'll get today's big story from Bryn coming right up. But first, the latest polling numbers have Obama hanging on to a 4-point lead, according to the Real Clear Politics average. U.S. President Obama is sticking close to D.C. today with a private fundraising event tonight. Mitt Romney is also rallying and fundraising in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. Vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan will be by Romney's side in Massachusetts. Vice President Joe Biden pops up on the map again. He is in Tamarack, Florida today. Where they're campaigning, what they're talking about, and everything you need to know about the U.S. race. This is your road to the White House. Over to Bryn Weese in Washington now. Bryn, what is up on the campaign trail?
Daniel, the big story today is that the U.S. intelligence authority, in fact, the country's top U.S. intelligence authority, admitted today that that attack in Benghazi that killed a U.S. ambassador and 3 other diplomatic workers was, in fact, a pre-planned terrorist attack with links to al-Qaeda. The statement came out today from the Office of National Intelligence Director James Clapper, and it appears to be an attempt to justify the White House's changing story on what that event was. The statement says initial information did point to a spontaneous protest, but that in fact later information said otherwise. The statement reads, "Throughout our investigation, we have continued to emphasize that information gathered was preliminary and evolving. As we learned more about the attack, we revised our initial assessment to reflect new information indicating that it was a deliberate and organized terrorist attack carried out by extremists. We do assess that some of those involved were linked to groups affiliated with or sympathetic to al-Qaeda." Now, this statement, Daniel, represents just the latest twist in what has been a wildly changing story from the U.S. government about what happened in Libya. You'll remember for the first 9 days, top U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and President Barack Obama, maintained that this attack was related to that video. In fact, Susan Rice, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, did 4 separate talk show interviews on the Sunday following the attack on September 16th, saying it was because of the video. Take a listen.
But our current best assessment, based on the information that we have at present, is that in fact what this began as was a spontaneous, not a premeditated, response to what had transpired in Cairo. In Cairo, as you know, a few hours earlier, there was a violent protest that was undertaken in reaction to this very offensive video that was disseminated. We believe that folks in Benghazi, a small number of people came to the embassy or to the consulate rather, to replicate the sort of challenge that was posed in Cairo. And then as that unfolded, it seems to have been hijacked, let us say, by some individual clusters of extremists who came with heavier weapons, weapons that, as you know, in the wake of the revolution in Libya are quite common and accessible. And it then evolved from there.
Now, here's where the story turns potentially scandalous, Daniel, because what we've heard now, media reports this week suggest, in fact, the White House and the U.S. government labeled the attack a terrorist attack 24 hours after it happened in order to unlock and mobilize resources to respond to it. And a new media report today citing 3 separate intelligence officials say the U.S. government actually intercepted radio communications from a pro-Al-Qaeda group operating in Libya just hours after the attack, bragging bragging that they'd carried it out and bragging to an al-Qaeda group operating elsewhere in North Africa. Now, Republican lawmakers say there is a cover-up afoot, and they've called for Susan Rice to resign. And also, Tennessee Senator Bob Corker is even referring to this episode as Benghazi-gate, saying, "I've become very suspicious. This is turning into nothing short of Benghazi-gate. Something is wrong. I really do think, as I've watched the response from this administration, there has to be something they're trying to hide or cover up." And Republican lawmakers in Congress have sent numerous letters, Daniel, asking what the White House knew and when, trying to get to the bottom of this. We'll see if this comes up on the campaign trail. So far, neither President Obama nor Mitt Romney at their various campaign stops are talking directly about the events in Libya being a terrorist attack. We'll see.
Yeah, and Breitbart, interestingly, features a blunt headline saying, people died, Obama lied. That could find its way into the campaign narrative or story, as they say.
Yeah, certainly. And remember that things are changing in these media reports very quickly. In fact, it was only today that this report surfaced that said the U.S. intelligence had overheard this pro-Al-Qaeda group bragging about carrying out this attack hours later. So at some point in time, especially with Republican lawmakers pounding the drum even louder about a cover-up, this could one day explode on the campaign trail, and Republicans could really use this to hammer away at Obama, because one of the concerns here, Daniel, remember, is that the White House may have been intentionally misleading Americans in order to avoid any embarrassment in this election. Remember, Obama really was seen as outreaching to the Muslim world, to the Middle East, saying Osama bin Laden is dead, Al-Qaeda is done, and there'll be no more terrorist attacks. And so Republicans are saying this may have been a cover-up and an intentional misleading of Americans in order to make sure that that storyline wasn't really annihilated and obliterated. So we'll see if it comes up.
Well, let's bring Syria into the conversation then. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta earlier today admitted that U.S. intelligence had lost track of some of the chemical weapons in Syria's control, and maybe some of those weapons have ended up in the hands of Syrian rebels, or who knows whose hands they may have ended up in.
Yeah, that's right. At a press conference, actually, with Defense Minister Peter MacKay, Leon Panetta admitted that U.S. intelligence suggests some of those chemical stockpiles in Syria have been moved, and that they didn't know whether the rebels had maybe taken some of those chemical weapons or whether the Assad regime had moved those chemical weapons. President Obama in August said that if any of the chemical stockpiles in Syria were moved, that would be a red line for him. And I'm quoting here, "That would change my calculus on the Syria issue." So President Obama had said earlier military action might be on the table when it comes to Syria if those chemical weapons started moving around. Leon Panetta saying they did. They have been moving around today. So again, you can imagine people are going to want to know whether the rebels have them, whether the Assad regime has moved them for safety to keep them out of the hands of the rebels, whether the Assad regime is preparing to use them. We don't know yet, and obviously that is a big issue, not only for Syria, but if it means U.S. military action may be following, that could mobilize all of NATO. So we'll see how this develops.
Yeah, and one would think that Obama's going to have to address it fairly soon.
You would certainly think so. I mean, the fact that it came up on a Friday maybe means we'll wait until Monday to see what happens. You can imagine the defense networks are going to be talking about this and talking about these chemical stockpiles because the U.S. officials have a pretty good sense of what is there in terms of chemical weapons. Now I'm sure they're trying to get a handle on what exactly has moved and also find out where they've moved to, because in the hands of the rebels, that could mean that they actually be used, whereas the Assad regime, maybe world leaders trust them enough to put them in safekeeping to make sure they're not used in what is now really a civil war in Syria.
All right. Thank you, Bryn.